7. Would it concern you to know that the church at Colossae, how do you spell it? O-S-S-A-E. They're the guys who received the letter to the Colossians, which is in Asia Minor. That's not mentioned. So for some reason, Colossae is missed out. Also, there was a church at Troas, also in Asia Minor, which we read about in Acts 20, verses 5 and following. And there was a church at Hierapolis, Colossians 4:13. We read about that, also in Asia Minor. So there were at least 7, 8, 9, 10 churches in Asia Minor as a result of Paul's missionary journeys. But we only get 7 letters. Why?
7 is a number of fullness.
7 is, it's a symbolic number, right? Case, it's a number indicating fullness or completion.
So, all these churches, die 7 that are mentioned,
Yeah.
that geldt voor de whole church.
Exactly. See? So we're talking about signs and symbols and pictures. We're not to understand that there were only 7 churches in Asia Minor and no more. Otherwise we'd say this is an error. But because we're dealing with symbols and symbolic language, the number 7 keeps coming up in the book. We're dealing with the church in its fullness and completion. So these 7 churches give us a snapshot of the whole church. And all these other congregations in Asia Minor would have received these letters as well and seen themselves reflected also in the material. And then we can extrapolate further out from that and say that this is really a snapshot of the church of the Lord Jesus Christ at any point in time, really. Because there are things in these letters that we can all take to heart. But there are 7. And that's a symbolic number. But since we know it's in signs and symbols, then we're not going to say, okay, there's our first mistake in the book. Now, we're going to finish here. Chapter 1, verses 12 to 15. This will whet your appetite for next time. What is the picture that we get of Jesus Christ here? What are some of the things that we see about Him? And verses 12 to 15. He's in the midst of the churches? Yes. How does He appear?
Glorious.
He's glorious. How does that shown? He's got hair like white. Okay, verse 14. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes are like blazing fire. Imagine the picture. Imagine an artist's depiction. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp, double-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in its brilliance. Imagine an artist's picture if you actually drew it or painted it. But the whole point here is that we're not supposed to be drawing it and painting it. We're supposed to be understanding the symbolism that overlays this picture of Christ and get the point behind the symbolic designation. And that's what we need to do next week. To figure out, what do we learn about the risen Christ with those symbols being applied to Him. Okay. Now there's one other thing just before we close. I wanted to hand this out to you, but I couldn't because the photocopy is out of order. But one of the major points to note about the symbolism of the book is it's constantly reaching back into the Old Testament. So a lot of what John was writing about was not new. At least the images and pictures that he uses are not unique to him. He's constantly, here's John up here, he's constantly reaching back into Old Testament material for his symbols and pictures. So, if we're going to understand the symbols that he's using, then we need to go back often to the context in which they were used in the Old Testament and understand how the prophets used these very same symbols. Because John is restating them. And he's bringing together all of this Old Testament material and he's concentrating it in his final book of the Bible. Now, as I say, I was going to give you this, but the description of the Son of Man, this is from a commentary, More Than Conquerors, on the book of Revelation. The description of the Son of Man in chapter 1, Daniel 7:9 and following, 10 verse 5, Ezekiel 1:7, 26 and following. The book of the life and the key of David, Exodus 32:33, Psalms 69:28. A throne set in heaven, the four living creatures, Isaiah 6:1, Ezekiel 1:26. And he goes on 2 pages, showing how a lot of the pictures that we get in the book of Revelation are pulled straight out of the Old Testament and reapplied. And I think that this is one of the major reasons why there's a lot of mystery associated with the book, particularly in evangelical churches today. It's because a lot of the understanding of the Old Testament has been either covered over or just lost. That many evangelicals today don't have a good working knowledge of the Old Testament. So they come to something like the book of Revelation, and it's so unlike anything else we read in the New Testament that it's very mysterious. But when we understand those minor prophets and Ezekiel and Isaiah and so on and so forth, and the way they presented their material, then we can see that John is not doing anything so radically different. So as we go through, we'll be dipping back into the Old Testament quite a bit, so that these images break open for you and are not so weird. And if you give me 2 seconds, one final thing, and that is chapter 22. We go right to the end of the book. We find that the tree of life comes back, the removal of the curse, the tree, the rivers. And so what we have is, at the end of the Bible, we go right back to the beginning, Genesis 1 to 3. So Revelation is in fact bringing to a close all of the earlier special revelation, and it's resolving the problems that we read about in Genesis 1 to 3 and the effect of that in human history.